Shalom. Today, the third day of the month of Sivan of the year 5778, 17th of May of the year 2018, the 47th day of the Omer count today, just 2 days from the climax of the 49th day, the completion of the count in preparation for the 50th day, the festival of Shavuot that falls on May the 20th. And today, as we are in the period of the receiving of the Torah, we study Malachi, the closing sections of his prophecy, which deal with God's day of judgment, and indeed an appropriate study for this period as we approach Matan Torah, because Malachi is seen as the last prophet of Israel. After the time of Malachi, prophecy in the mouths of the prophets ceased, and the knowledge that the prophets had attained could thenceforward only be attained by sages and also by those able to read from the outer signs of this world the inner intention and the messages of God. So we come now to Malachi chapter 3, starting at verse 13, and the previous section had begun at the end of the previous Bible chapter 2, verse 13, which is the beginning of a parsha that ends at verse 12. So from verse 17 of chapter 2 to verse 12 of chapter 3 is all one parasha, and there the subject of the reproof was the people's complaints that they saw no justice. They saw that the wicked prosper while the righteous are suffering, and if so, where is the judge and where is the judgment? And the previous parasha ending at verse 12 of chapter 2 was about how God's judgment is actually seen in the ability of God to bless Israel when Israel follows the Torah and performs the acts of tithing. And there we see the power of God. Now the question is again intensified of where is the God of justice? This was a recurrent theme at the time of Malachi among the returnees from Babylon, who were faced with antagonism from the nations on all sides, the Samaritans and the other nations that had been imported to the land of Israel by Sennacherib after the exile of the 10 tribes. And in the initial years of the Second Temple, there were many struggles, and the issues that are brought up in the ensuing reproof now, beginning at chapter 3, verse 13, are very relevant to our times. We have seen indeed that in our times, particularly the generation of the Holocaust and generation after the Holocaust, were perplexed by many questions about where is the justice of God. And that is what the prophet now reproves the people for. Verse 13, the prophet speaking in the name of God, the Hebrew text, Hazeku olai Divreichem Omar Adonai Va'amartem Mini debarnu olecho. I misread the last phrase. I will read the verse again. Chosku olai Divreichem Omar Adonai Va'amartem Ma nidebarnu olecho. Your words against me have strengthened, says the Lord. You have spoken harsh, strong words against me. And then the people once again innocently say, well, what have we been saying? And let us note the form of the verb here. What have we been saying among ourselves? Ma nidbarnu, which is somewhat unusual because the normal Hebrew for what have we been saying would be ma dibarnu. The form here, nidbarnu, is a nif'al form of the verb, indicating that a dialogue has been conducted among us with different people saying their piece, and out of this has come this talk among the people. And I point this up because we're going to see later on in the prophet's reproof to the people a most important phrase where in the move of repentance and the movement of return to God, the righteous will also be conducting their dialogue between themselves with the same use of this verb, as we shall see later on in our text. That is in verse 16. So what have the people been saying? The prophet now returns in verse 14. Amartem shov avoid Elohim uma betza ki shomarnu mishmarto v'chi holachnu kedoiranis mipnei Adonai tzevos. Here is the complaint of the people, which perhaps they did not like to admit to officially, but here it is that you have said it's in vain to serve God. What benefit is there to us that we have guarded his charge, his instructions, that is the Torah? We have kept away from the prohibitions of the Torah, and that we have gone about with darkness. Kedoranis is from the Hebrew term kedar, which has the connotation of a darkness, and with the connotation of a lowliness of spirit. We've gone with this meekness and humility, pushing ourselves downwards before the Lord. Here we can see indeed encapsulated in this verse the essential complaints that are brought by Job at great length at various points in his discourses in the book of Job. And here the people were murmuring among themselves, what is the point of this Torah pathway? And this indeed is a complaint that has been mirrored in the ages since the time of Malachi. And if so, the people go on, if we see no use to our righteousness, we're going to just abandon the path. Verse 15, continuing the tirade of the people, the hidden tirade against God. We see no justice, we see no point in our righteous pathway. Verse 15, V'ato anachnu ma'ashrim zeidim ki nivenu oisei rish'o gama bochanu Elohim vayimoleitu. Since we see no justice, we see there's no point in remaining meek and lowly, impoverished. If so, we say it's better to account happy the arrogant, that is to say, the nations of the world who are living with shalva, with tranquility and prosperity, while Israel are oppressed. And here indeed the prophet is putting to the mouth of the people a complaint that could well have been said throughout the generations of persecution during the time of the Second Temple and since the destruction of the Second Temple pretty much constantly. So we are going to count those arrogant leaders of the nations with their extravagant lifestyles happy. Why? Gam nivnu oisei rish'o. We see that indeed the perpetrators of wickedness have been built up. They've succeeded in building their empires of power for themselves. Gam bohanu Elokim vayimoletu. They have tested, they have tried God, and they have escaped. We see that they go overboard with the extremes of abusive power, which they commit in order to enhance their standing, their prosperity, their influence. That's the way to go. And I think it could be said in a sense that the words of Malachi here express indeed the feelings that were in the hearts, particularly of many Jewish people over the last 250 years, whose parents had trod in the ancestral path, and during the years of the exile, who had suffered indignities at the hands of the Christians and at the hands of the Muslims, and were simply beginning to feel there was no more point in this, when now the nations were beckoning and saying, if you will only abandon your traditional customs and costumes and languages and learn and study the thoughts, the philosophy and the literature of the nations, then you'll be much better off. And many of the Jewish people were inclined to follow that path. And here the prophet is really laying it bare, what was in people's hearts. And in the ensuing verses, we're going to see that God teaches, as indeed is the conclusion of the book of Job, that even when the wicked seem to prosper in this world, they will receive their requites in the world of truth. As we shall see, we're now entering into the sections of God's judgment. But as we come to the judgment, we have the stirrings of repentance among the people. So now in verse 6, at this very time when some are complaining about where is God, verse 16 in the Hebrew, Az nideberu yir'ei Adonai ish es re'ehu vayakashehi v'Adonai vayishmo vayikosehi seifer zikarohin lefonov la'yir'ei Adonai ulechoshevei shemo. I would like to offer my own translation here, as opposed to the translation that is available on the screen, because it is not that those who feared the Lord were also talking in that vein, although some may well have been tempted to think that way, as indeed was Job. But here the prophet counters when the people had said, "What have we been talking about?" Now a new category is introduced, the righteous, as nidberu, the same use of the verb, the nidberu, the nif'al grammatical form, where a dialogue is taking place among different participants. These now are the yir'ei Hashem, those who are truly in awe and reverence for the Lord. Ish es re'ehu, each one is now in a quiet personal dialogue with his and her fellow, his and her friend. Vayakshev Hashem vayishmo. God indeed is listening to this. He's listening attentively and he's heard it. These verbs here are grammatically in the future perfect, referring both to the past. God has already heard this dialogue that will be, and he shall hear it. Vayikosev sefer zikaron lefonov. Very, very beautiful sentiment here, that these words are indelibly etched into the memory of the Lord in the scroll that is before him, the scroll of remembrance. A scroll for all of the righteous, all those who truly fear the Lord and who think upon his name, who give importance and prestige to his name. And now these are the people that will be saved at the time of the judgment. Verse 17. Ve'hoyu li omar Adonai tzebaos Layom asher ani oise sugulo וחומרתי עליהם, כאשר יחמול איש על בנו האויב דויסוי. Well, these people, those that fear the Lord and contemplate his name, they shall be God's own on the day that he is making, the day of judgment that is coming, that day which for them will be the reward. God will make them the segula. Segula is the same term used in Exodus at the time of the giving of the Torah, when God is telling Moses he will make the people of Israel segula, a people of treasure, a treasured possession. And here we see that the receiving of the Torah at the time of the redemption is on the grassroots level, with one person talking to another, and it's those souls that are saved. V'chomalti alehem, I shall have mercy upon them, kasher yahamol ish al beno ha'oved oso. Just as a person will have mercy and tenderness towards his son who serves him. These two verses we shall presently comment on, verses 16 and 17, from the point of view of some insights of Rabbi Nachman into the very beautiful connotations of these verses. But to complete the parasha, let us turn to verse 18. At that time, when God will show his compassion to the righteous and the reverential as a father to a son that serves him, then v'shavatem uri'isem bein tzaddik lerosho bein oived Elohim la'asher lo ya'avodo. Then you'll come back and you'll see the difference between the righteous and the wicked, between one that serves God and one that has not served him. In other words, the judgmental hand of God is impossible to discern in our time, the time of exile, when the world is upside down and the wicked are ruling and the righteous are downtrodden. But as we come to approach the evocation of the day of judgment, we are assured even beforehand in this section, which concludes now at verse 18, the section that had started at verse 13, this section concludes with a promise that the righteous will, at the time of God's judgment, see who are the truly righteous, and they will see from the punishments of the wicked who were not righteous despite any hypocritical surface appearances. So before going on to the next section, let us return to verse 16 and bring forth the very beautiful teaching of Rabbi Nachman on this verse. Rabbi Nachman, in his Likutei Moharan, has a teaching in the first part of Likutei Moharan in Torah number 142, Kuf Mem Bet. And there he says so very beautifully that somebody who is not able to study at all, for example, somebody that was never taught the elements of the Torah and Am Ha'oretz, somebody who is ignorant of the Torah, or if the person is without any sefer, without any book, without any Torah work to study, or if the person were in the wilderness, only his heart is burning and he desires and yearns to be able to study and to serve God, then the very desire of his heart to learn, that itself is an aspect of studying out of a sefer, out of a book, because there are tzaddikim in different places in the world and they are engaged in a dialogue one with the other. They're distant from one another many hundreds of miles, And for example, one tzaddik might raise a question in the Torah, and a second in that second tzaddik's place will answer the question and say something that isn't itself an answer to the question. Sometimes one puts a question, another puts a question, and the very question of one is itself an answer to the question of the other. And through this, they are unknown to each other, engaged in a dialogue. And even though no human individual may hear this dialogue, the Holy One, blessed be He, hears the dialogue between the tzaddikim. And that, says Rabbi Nachman, that is an interpretation of the verse. Then in our verse in Malachi, then those that fear the Lord, each will speak with his companion. Namely, they are not speaking directly one to the other, which would be the connotation of the verb os dibru, or as yedaberu yirei Hashem ish Yisrael, the form of the verb, the nif'al, nidberu. He says that this itself is a dialogue that is brought about through each one going through his processes in the place where he is, and God is listening, and God puts the things one to the other, and out of this is written the book of remembrance. And Rabbi Nachman goes on to explain how the person that has no work to learn from, is unable to learn, has never been taught, is in a place without any access to study, the very yearning in his heart is itself the writing of a sefer. His work, his very yearning in his heart is included in this work of the Lord, the scroll of Hashem, the scroll of remembrance. One very beautiful teaching, therefore, from Likutei Moharan related to our verse on Malachi 3, chapter 3, verse 16. And then when the prophet comes back and says that on God's day of judgment, you will recognize the difference between the wicked and the evil, and God will have mercy on you, in verse 17, like a man has tenderness towards his son that ministers to him. Well, indeed, Rabbi Nachman in his teachings distinguishes between the service of God that is carried out as a servant, an eved, as opposed to the service of God that is carried out as a child of God, as a son, or one could say a daughter of God. This is considered to be a higher level of service, because the son and the daughter are drawn from the very essence of the father, whereas the servant is there to minister to the master. And Rabbi Nachman, in his teaching in Likutei Moharan, part 2, Torah 5, brings out this distinction between these levels of service of God, and says that when there is a son who is willing to descend to the level of a servant in order to bring about every kind of pleasure and satisfaction to his father, this is the highest level, and this is the level that Malachi is talking about here. And the level of the son that serves the father like a servant, and not only like a son, but as a servant, will have the very treasures, the most innermost treasures of God's vast treasury opened up to that person. Well, following those interpretations of Rabbi Nachman, let us now go on to the ensuing verses, which now begin a new parasha from verse 19, now directly speaking about the coming burning day of God's judgment. Ki nehi hayom bo'er katanu v'hoyu chol zeidim וכל עושה רישו קש וליחת עושם היום הבא אומר אדוני צבאות אשר lo yahazov lohem shoresh v'hanof. The people had said that they considered happy the zedim, the flagrant sinners and the arrogant, and that the workers of iniquity were built up. And God now promises that on the final day of judgment, all this will be overthrown and overturned. This avenging fire. Fire is the aspect of God's attribute of gevurah, of might, strength, discipline, sternness, and of his requiting of evil. And he will leave nothing of the wicked. Shoresh v'anaf, neither a root nor a branch, will all be gone. On the other hand, verse 20, for the righteous at that very time, verse 20, it's very, very beautiful verse. V'zorecho lochem Yireh Shemi Shemesh Tzedoko Umarepei Bichenofeho Vitzosemu Fishtem Ke'eglehi Marabeik. There shall shine upon you those that fear my name, a sun of righteousness and charity. Marpe bichenofeho, with healing in her wings. And you shall go forth, and you shall be increasing. You shall be prosperous. You shall be mighty, like the calves that are fed in the marbek, in the stall, the calves that are being fattened and strengthened. And at that time, verse 21, Va'asoisem reshohim ki yehiu efer tachas kapois ragleichem bayohem asher ani oiseh Omar Adonai Tzevaos. You shall trample the wicked, and they will be dust under the soles of your feet on the day that I am making, that I am preparing, says the Lord of hosts. So this second very striking parashah that we have studied today comes as the answer to the complaints of the people in the previous parashah. At the time of God's judgment, everything will be set right and justice will reign. Well, just to comment for a moment on verse 20, which speaks about the shining of the sun of righteousness. The Talmud very beautifully comments on this verse, and this is in Tractate Nedarim, Daf Ches Amud Aleph. V'zochol lachem yirei shemi, they shall shine to those that fear my name, says the God. Says the Talmud, these are people that would be afraid even to bring out from their mouths the name of heaven, that is to say, the name of God, to no purpose. These people who are so in awe and reverential of Hashem Yitbarach, who gave the Torah to Israel and signs his name throughout the Torah with that holy name, they would be afraid even to casually mention that name except in prayer, in a blessing, or in Torah and devotion. And the Talmud goes on to speak about this Shemesh Tzedakah, this sun of righteousness with healing in its wings. Abaye said, we may understand from this that the very dust in the rays of the sun shining by the day has a healing power. And this statement by Abaye about the healing power of the sun that will shine at that time is somewhat different from the statement of other rabbis who say that in time to come there will actually be no Gehinnom, there will be no hell, but the Holy One, blessed be He, will bring forth the sun out of its sheath. There will no longer be a protective layer around the sun, preventing it from damaging through the intensity of its rays, but God will remove that outer sheath, and the righteous will be healed through the sun, while the wicked will be judged by that heat of the sun. And that is what is being said here in our verse, which the Talmud states that the sun that will shine then will for you be a sun of tzedakah. Tzedakah being an influence of goodness that comes down from above. The concept of the Shemesh, Kabbalistically, is that of Ze'er Anpin, the so-called small countenance of God that reveals into this world, down, sending blessing down to the Nukva, to the Malchut, to the receiving aspect. And these two in the future will be joined together. There will be a yichud between Tiferet, Ze'er Anpin, and represented by the Shemesh, the sun, and Tzedakah, the blessing of influence that comes down to the world, to the Nukva, to the feminine aspect, the female aspect, and this will bring healing in its wings. The word kanaf in Hebrew refers to the corner of a garment. It has the aspect of something that is covered. It also has the aspect of something that is uncovered. This is a phenomenon of certain Hebrew roots, that certain Hebrew roots have the ability to simultaneously mean both one thing and its opposite. And here we have this in in this verse of the Shemesh Tzedakah that has healing for the righteous, while the arrogance have been burned up by the heat of the sun. Now the kanaf we have in Isaiah, it says that your teacher will no longer be hidden from you, odlo yikanef, where the aspect of the covering over of the garment is one of something that is hiding and concealing. So the teaching here is that for the righteous, the great light of the sun will indeed be brought down to the righteous for healing in veils and covers. These are the names of God. These are the attributes and the descriptions of God through which we are able, through these garments of godliness, we are able to have a connection with God that heals us. And then Israel will go forth and prosper. Another interesting connotation of this verse, which is brought out by the Midrash in the Yalkut Shimoni, is that there's a connection between the sun that will shine on Israel in the time of the future and the sun that shone upon Jacob as he came away from his struggle with Esau and the angel of Esau, where the angel of Esau had struck Jacob on his thigh and caused him to limp. And then the sun came forth, says the Midrash. The Holy One, blessed be He, said to Jacob, you are a sign and an indication of what will happen for your children. Just like when you went forth from Beersheba, sent forth by Isaac and Rebekah to go north to find your wife, when you went north and you reached the place of the temple, I caused the sun to set early to make you lie down there. And now that you're returning, I have caused the sun to shine upon you, as it says there in Genesis, in the portion of Vayishlach, after Jacob's struggle with the angel, Vayizrach lo hashemesh, that the sun shone upon him. And likewise too, when your children will go forth into exile in wretchedness, that will be as if their sun had set. But when they return at the time of the redemption, then will be fulfilled this verse: the sun of charity will shine to those that fear the Lord. And the Talmud in another place, the Talmud in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, comments on verse 21, Va'asoisim Rishoim, you shall tread upon the wicked, that these refer to the wicked sinners of Israel, and likewise the wicked sinners of the nations of the world. Their very bodies will be trodden upon by the righteous. What quite this means exactly, we will, God willing, witness at the time of the redemption. We shall be, God willing, on the side of those who revere God's name. And the wicked go down to hell, and there they are. They will be judged for 12 months. And after 12 months, their bodies will have disintegrated and disappears, and their souls will have been burned, and the wind will scatter them under the soles of the feet of the righteous. As it says in this verse in Malachi, you shall tread down the wicked, they shall be dust under the soles of your feet. With that, we come now to verse 22, which, with the following verses 23 and 24, is the closing verses of Malachi. This is now a new parasha. At the end of verse 21 was the close of a parasha. And now comes the closing words of prophecy to Israel. Verse 22, Zicheru Toiras Moshe Avadi Asher Tivisi Yoso V'choireiv Al Kol Yisrael Chokim U'mishpatim. Remember the Torah of Moshe, my servant Moses, our teacher, that I commanded him in Horeb, the wilderness of Sinai, for all of Israel. Laws and statutes and laws for all of Israel. Well, here the Torah is called after the name of the one who brought it to Israel, Moshe, our teacher. And nevertheless, the verse emphasized that it was not only a message for Moses, but for all Israel. The text emphasizes Al Kol Yisrael, it's for all Israel, commanded to Moses at that time, for all Israel, for all the generations. And there's a most interesting and important comment on this verse in our commentators. First of all, let us note that the initial three letters of the three initial letters of the first three words of the verse, Zichru Toras Moshe Zayin Taf Mem, are actually spell out the root of the name of the Hebrew month Tammuz. And of course it was in the month of Tammuz, on the 17th day of the month of Tammuz, when Moses had come down from Mount Sinai with the first tablets. He saw the making of the golden calf, which was the root sin of Israel, and he shattered the tablets. And say the sages, when Moses shattered the tablets of stone, forgetfulness descended into the world. And here we see that the name Tammuz, the month in which this happened, the month of forgetfulness, is alluded to in the initial letters of these first three words. Zayin, Taf Mem. Taf Mem Zayin is Tammuz. In other words, we have to protect ourselves through the long exile that was to ensue after the time of Malachi. We have to remember and remind ourselves and teach ourselves the Torah. Well, now, Radak, Rabbi David Kimche, on this verse says, Zichru Torahs Moshe, remember the Torah of Moses. He comments, the prophet is saying, all the while until the day of judgment shall come, you must in every generation remember the Torah of Moses, my servant, to practice in accordance with all that is written there. And he goes on to say somewhat cryptically, Asher tzivisi oisoi, God is saying, that which I have commanded him, says Radak, he didn't say it out of his own mind and heart. Radak here comments, just as I instructed him at Chorev, that is to say, that you must always remember the Torah exactly as I instructed Moses at Chorev, at Sinai. Continues Radak, Loi kedivrei ha'omrim ki lizman nesono, and not in accordance with the words of those who say that he only gave it for a limited time. That is to say, Radak here is implying his refutation from this verse of the replacement theology that says that the commandments were only incumbent upon Israel until a certain time, after which they would be abrogated. And he continues, Uvo hamaforesh upirisho ruchanis. So according to the view of those people that the original commandments were only for a limited time to be practiced, subsequent interpreters were forced to say that they must be primarily spiritual. Says Radak, V'zeh aposuk teshuvo lohem. This verse is the answer to them. What the last prophet to Israel was saying is, remember the Torah of Moses to practice as God commanded Moses at Chorev. And then these beautiful concluding words of the prophecy filled with hope and yet awesomeness. Hine anochi sholeach lochem eis Elio hanovi lifnei bo yom Adonai hagodol v'hanoiro. I'm sending to you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the day of the Lord, this great and awesome day. That is to say that here Malachi is clearly stating, as was implicit in his words earlier on in verse 1 of chapter 3, that Elijah comes to as the harbinger of the day of judgment, the day of redemption, preparing helping people to return to God, as expressed in this most beautiful verse, this double-edged sword at the end of the prophecy, verse 24. Ve'heshiv levavos al bonim, ve'lev bonim alav hoisom, penavo, ve'hikisi es haaretz cherem. Elijah will come and restore the hearts of the fathers to the children and of the children to the fathers. And then this Damocles sword hanging over the people. If you don't, God forbid, pen ovo, lest I come and I strike the land to the point of destruction. Well, now, in order not to end the reading of the prophet on such a fearsome note. It is customary in the reading of this prophecy in the synagogue, which is done always on the Shabbat immediately prior to the festival of Passover, of Pesach, known as Shabbat HaGadol, when this is the Haftarah, this chapter of Malachi, this is the Haftarah of Shabbat HaGadol. We read again the previous verse, verse 23, to end on a note of optimism of the coming of the prophet Elijah. Hinei anochi sholech lochem es Eliyahu hanovi lifnei bo yom Adonai hagodol v'norah. Here I am sending to you the prophet Elijah before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. Just a very final comment on the form of the name of Elijah. Elijah is spelt in different ways at different places in the Tanakh, and this is the subject of extensive drashot, in fact, in the writings of Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the Ari, and it's not a place where we can go into this right now, but we are talking here about the harbinger of the redemption who restores the hearts of the generations one to the other. We see, particularly in our time, and it's been witnessed in previous generations, the great distance between one generation and another, and how sometimes a younger generation may completely rebel against the older generation. The older generation may ignore the younger generation, and here we see the promise that Elijah will make peace in the families and peace in all of Israel speedily in our time. Amen. With that, my friends, we conclude our Tanakh study for today, and I'll be back, God willing, in just a few minutes with more from Rabbi Nachman of Breslov on the very fascinating excursus we are engaged in on the stages of coming close to the true Tzaddik, and as we are now present in his analysis of the whole concept of verbal confession before the Tzaddik. So we'll be back, God willing, in just a few minutes. Shalom, my dear friends. Let us now proceed with our studies today from Likutei Moharan. Shalom, today, the third day of the month of Sivan of the year 5778, corresponding to the 17th of May of the year 2018, the 47th day of the Omer count, just approaching now the festival of Shavuot. And today we continue with our study of Likutei Moharan, Chelik Aleph, the first volume of the original Hebrew printing, Torah Dalet, the fourth discourse, where we continue with the study of the concept of the power of verbal confession to achieve atonement when it is in front of the Torah sage. And in the previous section that we studied, we learned about the power of verbal confession to bring off the stain and the inscription of sin from the bones of the sinner, because of because the words coming forth in the confession before the sage are coming forth before the aspect of fire, the purificatory fire that burns off that which was forbidden from the bones of the individual. Well, now in the ensuing section, we are brought by Rabbi Nachman to look at another aspect of the great power of the true sage to bring about atonement, and he teaches us this idea through the verse in Proverbs chapter 17 that says, Chamas melech malachi moves, the wrath of the king is angels of death, emissaries of death. And the same verse continues immediately after those words in the Hebrew, Ve'ish chochom yechapreno. But the man that is a hacham, a true wise individual, yechapreno, he has the power to atone for the individual who would be subject to this wrath. So here we see in the verse a reference to the power of the sage to bring about atonement. Let us follow through Rabbi Nachman's interpretation of the first words of the prophet of the verse. What is this wrath of the king that comes forth with these angels of death? Says Rabbi Nachman, Ki chamoso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'shvil amalchus shehishpil al yedei avonosov. The anger of the Holy One, blessed be He, against an individual is on account of the malchut, the attribute of holy kingship and royalty that the person has degraded and cast down on account of their sins. And yet, continues the verse, Ve'ish chochom yechapreno, the one that is a hacham will have the power to atone for this. Hainu bechinas talmid chocham, explains Rabbi Nachman. Here we have the category, the concept of the talmid chacham, literally the student of a sage, one who is a sage in virtue of that person's attachment to a sage. Bechinas Moshe, as we've already seen, the true sage of the Torah is an aspect of Moshe. Hu yechaper lo. It is specifically the true sage that has the power to attain for the sinner. K'moshe Kosov, now Rabbi Nachman will explain why, as it's written in the prophet Micha, chapter 7, V'oiver al pesha l'she'eris. The other verse says, in recounting the attributes of mercy of God at the end of the prophet Micha, among the attributes, V'oiver al pesha l'she'eris. He passes over transgression for the remnant. On the surface, the meaning of the verse is that there will be a remnant of the people who will be left because God will forgive their sins. But our sages in the Talmud comment on this verse that it also alludes to those who are meek and humble. The verse says, "Ve'over al pesha she'eris," God passes over the transgression of the she'eris, explains the Talmud in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, Daf Yud Zayin, "Lemisha meisim atzmoi keshirayim." To whom does God forgive? The one that makes himself like crumbs, like a crumbled residue, because he has demolished all the evil sides of his personality, and he is left with the shirayim. In other words, they are darshaning the Hebrew word she'eris, the residue, as having the connotation of the shirayim, all that is left of one that has nullified himself. In other words, to whom does God give the power of atonement? The Tzaddik, who has brought himself to the level of perfect meekness and humility. Nimtzo keshebo lifnei talmid chacham umoitzi kol seirufov lifnei atalmid chacham. Out of this we deduce, it comes forth, that when the person comes before the Torah scholar and brings forth all of those permutations of rationalizations and evil thoughts and actions inscribed on the person's bones, when the person brings it forth in his confession before the Talmid Chacham, before the sage, Ve'atalmid Chacham hu b'chinas Moshe. Now this sage is in the category of Moshe. If he is a true sage, he will have the attribute of Moshe, shemesim atzmo keshirayim. He makes himself like shirayim, like a residue. This is an aspect of humility and meekness. K'moshe kosuv, like it says of Moses in Deuteronomy, in Numbers chapter 12, at the time of the words spoken against Moses by Miriam and Aaron. V'ho'ish Moshe onov ma'od. The Torah testifies that the man Moses was most anav. He was exceedingly anav, exceedingly meek. Here he is called Ho'ish Moshe, the man Moses. It's precisely through his humility and meekness and self-effacement that he is called Ish Chacham. He's called one that attained the spiritual status of a man, an Ish, that is a Chacham. K'moshe Kosuv, as we see in the verse from Job chapter 28, the verse says, V'achochmo me'ayin timotzei. Wisdom, the attribute of chokhmah, the attribute of the chacham, me'ayin timotzeh. From where does it come forth? Well, these Hebrew words in the verse in Job chapter 28, me'ayin, wisdom comes forth out of ayin. It comes forth out of nothingness. In other words, out of the person's state of self-negation, self-effacement in their humility. The humility, when a person attains humility, wisdom will come down to them. It's precisely through this, in virtue of this humility, the person that makes himself like the shirayim, like the residue, that the Torah sage, the true Torah sage, has the power to attain for the sinner when the sinner brings forth the sinner's words of confession before him. As it says there in the verse in Proverbs, that although the wrath of God is angels of death, the side of death, the side of punishment for the sin, nevertheless the true Chacham, who has such a level of humility as Moses, has the power to bring atonement. And in the ensuing section, Rabbi Nachman will very interestingly explain Moses' argument to save Israel from God's wrath after the sin of the golden calf. The following section of Likutei Moharan raises some most fascinating ideas about Moshe and what he is. And as we shall see, the relationship between Moshe and particularly Rabbi Nachman. Continues Rabbi Nachman then in his teaching here in Likutei Moharan, Bishvil zeh, on account of the above, that it's the humility of the sage that enables him to bring atonement. It's on account of this, Kashispalal Moshe al Cheto Egel, when Moses prayed for Israel on account of the sin of the golden calf, which is the root sin, the violation of the second commandment and the negation of the first commandment, where Moses had to pray for their violation of this root sin. Omar, he said in his prayer, Im tiso chatosam, if you will take aside their sin, remove it, and forgive them, well and good. Ve'im ayin mecheni no, if not, then please erase me from the book that you are writing. Moses knew that everything that is happening now has eternal and cosmic significance. It's all being recorded in God's book as it is in the Torah. And Moses argues with God, here the people have sinned, yes, but if you are not going to forgive them, then blot me out from your book. Don't include me in your book. And why? What is Moses arguing here? As Rabbi Nachman explains, it is quite inevitable that a person is bound to experience some feeling of grandeur and a swell of pride if he hears people telling his praises. All the more so if a great king is praising and glorifying a person. It's quite inevitable that some feeling of swelling pride will come to that person. It would require a person to nullify all of their feelings, all of their material being. Then a person will be able to hear their own praises said. There will not come to the person any arrogance on account of that. And that precisely was like Moses, our teacher. Moses saw written in the Torah that the Almighty was dictating to Moses word by word. Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Each portion of the Torah begins, and the Lord spoke to Moses, and the Lord said to Moses, Vayisrael koden b'chol yom ha'Torah shivcha shel Moshe. Israel, the people of Israel, read every day in the Torah the praises of Moses. Moses himself writes in the Torah his own praises. He's the one that writes. There was none more humble than Moses, writes about the exploits of Moses. And yet Moses had no self-glorification and pride over this. The Torah testifies of Moses. The man Moses was meek in the extreme. Most certainly on account of his humility, Moses had the power to atone for the sin of the golden calf. As written in King Solomon's book of Proverbs, the one that is a true sage has the power to atone for the sin that has evinced the anger of God. Now we will understand what Moses was arguing in saying, well, if not, then erase me. If I do not have this power, if you will not forgive their sin, so that through your refusal to forgive them, you will be showing and demonstrating that I do not have so much humility. that I would be able to atone for them the sin of the making of the golden calf. And therefore my request is, if you don't consider that I am sufficiently humble to attain atonement for the people, as written that the sage will atone, if you don't think I have that level of humility, I request, blot me out, in order that I will not stumble into arrogance. I see and hear all the time the telling of my name and my praises in the Torah. Who can possibly stand up to this? He will constantly hear the narration of his glory and his praises, and he will not get arrogant. Unless that person is a very great, meek and humble individual. If I am indeed sufficiently humble to stand up to this, it is necessary for you to forgive their sin. As it's written in the prophet Micha, which is a reflection of the 13 attributes of mercy. One of them is V'over al pesha l'she'eris. He passes over the sin of the remnant, namely the one that makes himself like Shiraim, the ultimately humble sage. V'zeu vayhi b'shur melech. And that is why Moses was able to secure atonement, and as it says at the end of the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 33, Vayhi v'Yeshurun melech, there was in Yeshurun a king. Yeshurun is one of the names for Israel, having the aspect of Yosher, of Yashar, of the straightness and the rectitude of Israel. And in the people of Yeshurun there is a king, Hainu shehamalchus olo l'shorsho. At the conclusion of the Torah, we see that the malchut, the aspect of godly kingship over us that had been cast down through sin, now ascends to its root through the humility of Moses. As it's written in Psalms 37, Ve'anovim yirshu oretz, it will be the meek and the humble that will inherit the earth. That is to say, the meek will receive and reveal the attribute of God's kingship. Eretz hi dina de malchuso. For the concept of Eretz, the earth, is a metaphor and a symbol for the din, the rule of malchut, the rule of kingship. As we see in the proof text in Job chapter 20, Ve'eretz miskoimemo loi. The earth stands up to the rebuke of God. The Eretz here is again in the verse in Job, which is depicting the earth under the rule of God, under God's kingship. The Eretz is an expression of din, when the holy Malchus is restored to her true position. So here in this section, Rabbi Nachman has been explaining that the power of the Tzaddik to secure atonement for the sinner is precisely through the ultimate humility of the Tzaddik, where he is so self-effaced that he is able to attain to the highest levels of God's mercy and draw them down into the world. Before we conclude this section, let us just comment that here in this most original chidush, this novel interpretation of Rabbi Nachman of this section, he has quoted the verse in Exodus chapter 32, verse 32. V'ato im tiso chatosom v'im ayin mecheni no misifrecho asher kosovto. Now, if you will forgive their sin, well and good. If not, blot me out, please, from your book that you are writing. It is most fascinating that Rabbi Nachman has precisely cited this verse in introducing his remarkable chidush about the power of the Tzaddik to atone, where in fact in this verses we shall see the very name of Nachman is actually included in the letters of the verse. Nachman mi'uman. Nachman mi'uman in the word im ayin mecheni no, the concluding nun of the word ayin is the concluding nun of the name Nachman. And then Nachman's name appears in reverse with the following word mecheni, mem chet nun. So we actually have the name Nachman backwards in this very verse, nun chet mem nun. And the town of Nachman, which is Uman, where he chose to be buried, and he said that this would be his eternal resting place, is also alluded to in this very verse, in the Hebrew of the verse, because the initial letters of the words Ve'im ayin mecheni no are Vov Aleph Mem Nun, which are actually the Hebrew letters of the name of the town Uman. Vov Aleph Mem Nun will make up the Hebrew way of spelling the town Uman. Aleph Vov Mem Nun, and then the mem of mi sifrecho would be mi Uman. So we do see here the full name of Nachman mi Uman written out explicitly in the Torah in Exodus chapter 32, verse 32. And this is a sign of the amazing Ruach HaKodesh of Rabbeinu Nachman and his link, and the link between the humility attained by Rab Nachman of Breslev and Moshe Rabbeinu. With that, my friends, we conclude our studies for today. And today is the most auspicious day, the 3rd of Sivan, as we prepare for the coming festival of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, and Kabbalat Torah, the receiving of the Torah, on this Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night and Sunday. And I would like to wish you my best wishes for Chag Sameach, a truly joyous festival of Shavuot this year, following the coming Shabbat tomorrow evening, and Yom Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom Mvorach, a good and a blessed Shabbat, and Chag Sameach, a truly joyous festival of Shavuot, where we will indeed receive the Torah into our very hearts and souls, and resolve and carry through with our resolve to remember the Torah of Moshe and to keep the Torah of Moshe to the utmost of our strength. Shalom from the holy city of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh.